The Pokemon World Championship takes place next month in Japan, where the next Pokemon World Champion will be crowned. But you first have to qualify for the tournament by competing in the tournament circuit and gaining 300 championship points. Think of the championship points as the gym badges you need and Japan as Victory Road. Unfortunately, there is only one event left and I am at 224 out of the 300 points required. That means if I don't qualify in this event, I am eliminated and my season is over. Everything is on the line in this tournament. Fortunately, the last event of the year is also the biggest event of the year, the North American International Championship in Ohio. The International Championships are grand events that happen once per continent in the Western Circuit. These events are massive and give out a ridiculous amount of points per tournament. For example, winning a regional tournament gives you 200 points, but winning an international championship gives you 500 points. Correspondingly, these tournaments also become a lot tougher because top players from all over the world show up to these events in search of these high point totals. My goal entering the tournament was to get a very modest finish of top 256 because that would give me 80 championship points, which is enough to reach 300. But suddenly, things changed.
More than 2,000 flights have been canceled.
More than 35,000 delays and 7,000 cancellations.
Thousands more flights were canceled across the country today due to inclement weather.
Severe weather.
Due to severe weather.
Leaving travelers stuck in airports and sending tempers soaring.
Bad weather was limiting the number of players who could actually get to the tournament. The number of players who get points for a tournament depends on the number of players in the tournament. For example, if there's only 50 players in a tournament, only the top 16 get points. These rules are there for obvious reasons. It happens that only if there are more than 800 players, then top 256 becomes eligible for points. There were 1,020 registrants combined for all divisions, and you can assume that roughly 10 to 15% of these people don't show up for whatever reason. Maybe if you really push it, 20% as a maximum don't show up. It looked pretty clear that the tournament would have 800 players and top 56 would pay out. But because of the sudden weather issues and travel delays for a lot of people, an abnormally large amount of people couldn't actually make it to the event. The final player count ended up being 777, which was not enough to hit the 800 mark. That meant that they would only pay out championship points for reaching top 128 and not top 256. This changed many players' qualification scenario, including mine. Whether I got 80 CP for top 256 or 100 CP for top 128 was ultimately irrelevant, but now I needed to get top 128. That doesn't fundamentally change my game plan, after all the goal each round is to win, but it did make me a little more nervous going into the tournament. In any case, it couldn't be helped and I set off for round 1. In round 1, I faced off against a balanced team, which was actually the same 6 Pokemon as mine. We both were using the most standard, boring team possible. Not that it's a bad thing, because my approach going into the tournament was to play it safe. I didn't need to reinvent the wheel. All I needed was a solid finish. Top 128 is either a 7-2 record or a 6-3 record with a high resistance. Resistance is your opponent's records and is used as a tiebreaker. The fundamental idea is that you deserve to be ranked higher if you play tougher opponents. The system's not perfect, but it gets the job done. Fluttermane, Chi-Yu, Tinglu, Iron Hands, Amoonguss, and Gyarados. It's a team that has had several good performances throughout the season. The main difference between teams is in the variation of movesets on the Pokemon. Similar to the team that won the Hartford Regionals earlier this year, I had Choice Specs Chi-Yu for power, Speed Boosting Booster Energy Fluttermane for speed, Assault Vest Tinglu for special attackers, Intimidate Gyarados for physical attackers, Amoonguss for general utility and Spore, and Swords Dance Iron Hands for setup sweep. In a mirror matchup, it's important to find out who has the faster Pokemon and also how to position them correctly. My main goal is to get my Chi-Yu in the game as much as possible so I can inflict large damage with Choice Specs. If I can couple that with Fluttermane, I can form an unstoppable attacking core because nothing resists both fire and fairy. It's a pretty common idea for my team overall. Fluttermane and Chi-Yu are some of the best Pokemon in the format and they also work well together. It took 3 games, but I win the mirror match and I start out 1-0. In the next round, I play a Garchomp Tailwind team, which is a matchup I was nervous about. Garchomp Tailwind is one of the most common archetypes in the format and for good reason. Speed and power are the fundamentals and you get a lot of that with that core. The reason it's tough for my team is that I rely on Intimidate Gyarados to beat physical attacking Pokemon, but Garchomp commonly runs Clear Amulet to block that. Also, Garchomp is one of the few Pokemon you see on Tailwind builds that naturally outspeeds and beats Chi-Yu. The only way to outspeed it for me is with my Flutter Mane, but Garchomp can Terrestrialize out of that weakness. It creates an interesting dynamic where Garchomp tries to inflict as much damage as possible in the early game so that Qianpao and friends can win late game. But because it's such a common team, I'm also prepared for it. I have the relatively uncommon Stone Edge on Ting-Lu, that way I can hit Talonflame, and I've also prepared my strategies with Flutter Mane. Fundamentally, my idea is to try and use Flutter Mane to try and force the Garchomp to Terrestrialize to a type that beats Fairy. Then, once it's a Fire or Steel type, I can go after it with the Ground type Ting-Lu or the Water type Gyarados. In Game 1, my Ting-Lu dodges Talonflame's Will-O-Wisp on turn 1 and then OHKOs back with Stone Edge. A burnt Stone Edge would have done around 80% to Talonflame and is part of my plan, but removing Talonflame while also denying Tailwind is a massive advantage for me, and I was able to win Game 1 comfortably. Game 2 is a lot closer, but my strategy was overall good and I was able to get the win to go 2-0. In round 3, I fight another Tailwind team, but this is more balanced and has Pokemon like Amoonguss. They can either go for a full-on Tailwind approach, or they can play it slower and play more of a balanced approach too. This requires a different approach from me because he's not bringing Tailwind at the start every game. Sometimes he might just bring Tailwind at the end. Game 1 comes down to an Iron Hands and Tailwind versus my Chi-Yu. I was hoping that my Chi-Yu outspeeds, but most Iron Hands on Tailwind teams are EV'd to outspeed Chi-Yu and I lose Game 1. I fight back to win Game 2 and it all comes down to Game 3. But in Game 3, he leads Iron Hands Amoonguss, more of a balance mode, and I don't manage Spore very well and I lose the game to put me at 2-1. Just barely, the pressure is starting to seep in a little because I do have to aim for 7-2 because there's no guarantee that 6-3 is a good enough record. There's a lot of anxiety in knowing that you may not be good enough with your record, so 6-3 is not a safe place to be. In round 4, I fight another Tailwind team against another player who's trying to qualify, so this is a big match for both of us. His Tailwind team is very similar in composition to the popular Garchomp Tailwind team. However, he has a great Tusk instead of Garchomp. My Chi-Yu is very HP invested, so I could take on attacks from Pokemon like Flutter Mane, so I wasn't really too worried about that at all. But the key of his team is that it's really slow. It's almost entirely dependent on Tailwind. If I can remove Tailwind, then Choice Specs Chi-Yu becomes unstoppable. My game plan is about doing everything I can to remove Talonflame, stall out 4 turns of Tailwind, and then win with Chi-Yu late game. For example, I would lead Ting-Lu and Flutter Mane and use both Pokemon to attack Talonflame to make sure I knock it out. This strategy proves to be effective and I'm able to win the round and move on to 3-1. So far so good and I'm on the pace for 7-2. In round 5, I play a balanced team which has a different core than mine. It has Pokemon like Swords Dance King Gambit, and the Fire Water core is Arcanine Amoonguss Iron Bundle. I end up losing Game 1, and then in Game 2 my Chi-Yu is EV'd to live a Terra Fairy Specs Flutter Mane Moonblast, but it gets critical hit and I lose to drop to 3-2. I'm now in a very uncomfortable position. I'm looking at my resistance stat and it's actually good, but it's not great. I have to treat every game as a must-win game from here on out. I need 4 straight wins to qualify for the World Championship. At 3-2, I get matched up versus a Rain team. Rain is deceptively tricky to handle. I have the Pokemon to handle it, but they need to be in the right order. For example, Amoonguss counters Huge Power Azumarill, which is Rain's star Pokemon, but it takes a lot of damage from Pelipper's Hurricane. With Intimidate Gyarados and Amoonguss, I have the right core to beat Rain, but I have to be careful with how I do it. I use a strategy built around Swords Dance Iron Hands. With Safety Goggles, my Iron Hands is immune to anything Amoonguss can try to do to me. I can boost with Swords Dance and then Drain Punch or Wild Charge my opponent. In the other team slot, I can switch in and out with Gyarados and Amoonguss for Gyarados' Intimidate and Amoonguss' Regenerator. Amoonguss also has Pollen Puff to heal Iron Hands and Rage Powder to redirect attacks off of Iron. My Iron Hands strategy works and I win to move up to 4-2. 3 more wins left. For round 7, once again I get matched up versus a Garchomp Tailwind team, and once again my plan is the same. There's a few tricky Pokemon on his team like Rotom Wash, which beats Gyarados and Ting-Lu, but it doesn't change the fundamentals of my plan. Just like round 2, I get the win and I move to 5-2. The dust is settling right now and my top 128 picture is getting clearer. Fortunately for me, all my opponents were good players and my resistance is above average. If I finish 7-2, I guarantee to make it to Worlds, but it's looking more and more like 6-3 might be enough. There is a lot of uncertainty, however, and you can never bank on resistance to be the one that carries you. In my mind, I still have to go 7-2. 6-3 is just way too risky. In the penultimate round, I play another popular playstyle known as Mouse Ape, where you use a combination of Beat Up Mousehold and Rage Fist Annihilate. Honestly, I was expecting to face a lot more of this playstyle. It's pretty common. The key for this matchup for me is my Choice Specs Chi-Yu, because it should outspeed the core of Mousehold Annihilate and inflict large amounts of damage. Except in the game, his Annihilate outspeeds my Chi-Yu. Most Annihilates choose to train other stats like special defense and HP, that way they can live more hits. But his Annihilate was a max speed with a jolly nature. My Chi-Yu has a lot of HP investment but not a lot of speed. This was a calculated decision and was something I was okay with. Being able to live hits from Pokemon like Fluttermane is extremely valuable, and max speed Annihilate is not a common Pokemon at all. It was a trade-off that I was willing to make, and while it benefited me all tournament, it made this particular matchup miserable. My way to beat physically attacking Pokemon is with Intimidate Gyarados, which doesn't work versus Defiant Annihilate. My speed boosting Fluttermane is fast, but it isn't strong enough to beat Annihilate because I need ways to overpower redirection Pokemon like Follow Me Mousehold and Rage Powder Amoonguss. With my Chi-Yu being outsped by Annihilate, I'm not able to overcome the matchup and I end up losing to drop me to 6-3. And now we're really in the trenches and I don't even bother to check my resistance. No matter what happens, I need to win my final round, and after that, it all goes down to fate. And for round 9, I get matched up versus a Sun team for the first time. But his Torkoal isn't the scary part. Truthfully, it's not very good into my team at all. I have Pokemon like Ting-Lu and Gyarados which can beat Sun pretty easily. What's scary are the non-Sun Pokemon on his team. He had a Fake Tears Streamtail with Fluttermane and Choice Scarf Chi-Yu. Fake Tears can lower my special defense and then he can throw off devastating attacks. Fortunately, I do have the speed advantage with speed boosting Fluttermane. I outspeed all 3 Pokemon in that core and I can threaten large amounts of damage. Unlike the last game, my large HP Chi-Yu comes in handy here because even after something like Fake Tears, it's able to live a Terra Fairy Fluttermane Dazzling. Overall, I'd say I have a very good matchup. I can lead with my own Fluttermane Chi-Yu and do large amounts of damage and then finish off with Ting-Lu in the back. This strategy works, but I get incredibly unlucky to lose game 1, and at that point I'm really feeling the heat. I have a winning strategy, but I couldn't get it done, and now there's a chance they adapt for game 2. He's using an unconventional team, and I don't know what he's thinking. Is he going to use the same core again? Is he going to switch it up? I don't know enough about his team to really get an idea of how he wants to play it. I decide to trust my gut that for me, Fluttermane Chi-Yu is my best lead, and he does the same thing too entering game 2, and we both have the same leads as before. This time though, without the bad luck, I'm able to win and I go 1-1. I decide to believe in the heart of the cards and I lead with the same lead that I led the first 2 games, Chi-Yu and Fluttermane. This is my best lead, I'm confident in that. I decide to go for a gutsy predict. In the first 2 games, he's always used Fake Tears versus my Chi-Yu which doesn't have Protect, which was a losing play in game 1 and 2. So I had a feeling that he might try to change it up. So instead of attacking with my Fluttermane, I use Protect, and it works. He uses Fake Tears and then Moonblast into my Fluttermane, while my Chi-Yu uses Heat Wave unprotected. It's a completely winning play if it hits both Pokemon, because then on the next turn I can use Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam to finish off both Pokemon too. But it misses. It only hits one of the Pokemon. So I don't get my auto win there and I still have to keep fighting. The turn 1 predict still did give me an advantage though. We trade a couple Pokemon and we enter an endgame where it's his Mudsdale versus my Ting-Lu and Iron Hands. I'm basically in the clear here because there's no way he can beat my 2 Pokemon. But it comes down to one last obstacle. His Mudsdale has Fissure. All it takes is one Wild Horse and it can knock out both my Pokemon with Fissure and I'll lose the game from there. All series I've limited its effectiveness as much as possible, but Mudsdale will get one Fissure chance at least here versus me in game 3. There's nothing I can do anymore and I let him go for it. He goes for it, but it misses. Then in the next turn, I knock out the Mudsdale and I win the game to move on to 6-3. At 6-3, all that's left is waiting for the final standing. There's nothing more I can do, it all comes down to my resistance. Did I make the top 128? Finally, they print out the official standings and post it on the wall. I go over there to check to see if my name is there. I search for my name and I find it. 97th place. Good enough for top 128. 128 and 100 championship points. My total moves up to 324, just enough for the metaphorical 8th gym badge, and I qualify for the Pokemon World Championship in Japan. I will be competing in the final leg to become the Pokemon World Champion. See you all in Yokohama.